Thomas Jefferson was a piece of shit. He is an overrated founding father. Alexander Hamilton was far superior. And if you watch any of my other videos, you know that this is a reoccurring theme to me and to my channel. The consequences and the ramifications of Jefferson's political ideas and his legacy can still be felt today in many ways. Most notably is what I like to call Francophilia, which is just this obsession with French culture, French thinking. And these things are a French culture is an intellectual disease upon mankind. The foreign policy of the United States should have remained more in line with what Alexander Hamilton had envisioned and what he had convinced George Washington to adopt, which is namely a more pro-England approach to trade, and this would have led to a more pro-Prussia view as the 19th century had progressed. Instead, we deviated from that and we sided with that asshole Thomas Jefferson, and we decided to side with the French. And throughout our history, we have always maintained that relationship of siding with France over Prussia. And this video is not about the history of France. It's not about the geopolitical relations of European countries. So I don't want to deviate on that too much. I want to keep this just during the existence of the United States and the 13 colonies. He was a rapist. He impregnated his slave, Sally Hemings. When she was 14, they were in Paris. Of course, they were in Paris. If it wasn't rape, which it most likely probably was, he was 44 and she was 14. That's still what we would consider pedophilia. All right, so let's get into the history a little bit. So during the colonial period, when we were the 13 colonies under control of Great Britain, our first war is the French and Indian War. Now, this is the American name for it. In England, it's known as the 7 Years' War. Great Britain's main ally during the 7 Years' War was the Kingdom of Prussia. It's a country that should be talked about more just because it has more consequence to Enlightenment values and what we in the West consider Western values. The leader of Prussia, the King of Prussia, was Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great's a very interesting individual. Now, for starters, he is gay. It's widely accepted that he was an openly closeted homosexual, and this was known during his time. Now, as I said in the beginning, I don't want to deviate too far into the European history of the 7 Years' War. But Frederick the Great will come up in later videos because it's a great example of why the LGBTQIA plus community should side with the Republic and the Republicans. Because if you look at the history of the West, I don't see any other area on earth that has as much acceptance and tolerance for homosexuality than Western Europe and the United States. And if you live in Pennsylvania, or if you're familiar with Pennsylvania, there is the town King of Prussia right outside of Philadelphia. This is where it gets its name. Now, obviously, England and Prussia would win the 7 Years' War. And what that means for the United States is that we gained the Northwestern Ordinance. And so we got the territory from the Appalachian Mountains out into the Mississippi River. The King of England forbade the colonists from going over into that territory, and England wanted to leave it open only for traders. And this was one of the things that would really piss off the colonists and lead them to the American Revolution. Now, both Hamilton and Jefferson are considered founding fathers, but their roles during the Revolutionary period were different. Hamilton was a soldier, and he was a commanding officer under George Washington, and that's how they met. That's how they formed a relationship, and a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. Thomas Jefferson was obviously he was a plantation owner, he was a slave owner, and all that. And of course, he is credited with writing the Declaration of Independence. Now, he did not actually write the Declaration of Independence. He was a part of what's known as the Council of Five, who were responsible for writing the Declaration of Independence. Ben Franklin would help Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration, and he also helped edit some things to make it more poetic and also more politically digestible for the American people. So it really makes me mad because Thomas Jefferson claims to be an intellectual. His founding of the University of Virginia is one of the accomplishments that's on his epitaph. So you would think that plagiarism would be a big deal. Not citing those people who helped you would also be a big deal, right? It shouldn't be Thomas Jefferson. It should be Thomas Jefferson at all. He had four fucking people help him, and the only reason he was given the task of physically writing it was because he was the youngest one, and Ben Franklin didn't feel like doing it. So, and if you ever learn about the Revolutionary War, one of the facts that's always pointed out was that France helped us. France helped us, but the aid they gave us is so completely fucking overrated. Like they didn't even show up until like the final battle because the American colonists had to win some major victories to prove to the French that it was worth the investment. Battles like the Battle of Bunker Hill, for instance. So when the Battle of Yorktown happened and the French blockade came in, we had pretty much already put England on its heels. France also didn't help us out of the goodness of his heart. Right? France helped us to undermine England. If the United States did some shit like that today, all these people who think Thomas Jefferson and France are so fucking great would be crying and bitching that America is getting involved in a proxy war and that we're being police of the world. But, history is written by the victors, and people don't really think twice about the things that they're told from the schools and from the media. So I just think that's hypocritical that, society loves the fact that France helped us. If we did that to any country in the world today, they'd lose their shit. Not to mention the money that Louis XVI spent on that actually really damaged the French economy. And that economic downfall would be one of the things that would lead up to the French Revolution, which is also very fucking overrated. You're not even like the first European country to have a revolution based on liberty, fraternity, and equality. Some dumbass commie shit that doesn't make any sense. And then not only that, the French Revolution didn't do shit. Right after the French Revolution, you have the Reign of Terror, where they were cutting everyone's heads off. Shit like that. And then right after the Reign of Terror, you have Napoleon and the French Empire. The wars of Napoleon were completely unnecessary, and they did nothing but cause millions of deaths for no reason. Now, during Washington's presidency, Hamilton would be the Secretary of the Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson would be the Secretary of State. The only person on his cabinet who was not a Federalist was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was also the only person who was pro-slavery. So, he basically just had to fucking babysit Thomas Jefferson and make sure he was getting along with everybody because, as we all know, Democrats cannot work with other people. They will not compromise with you. So, as a result, Thomas Jefferson just completely tried to undermine every policy that Alexander Hamilton wanted to do. Now, I once read that Hamilton was trying to create a fiscal military state. I do not know why making money and kicking ass is somehow a detriment. And I mean, it's pretty simple. Alexander Hamilton favored a strong federal government. The federal government would be above the state governments, and that would be the directing power of the country. Whereas Thomas Jefferson and the Democrats favored more states' rights, and they are not federalists. They're anti-federalists. So it's as simple as that, and that's basically the big political divide throughout the country from 1790 to 2023. The cultural divide between Hamilton and Jefferson, that still plays a role today. George Washington's vice president was John Adams, and then he would succeed Washington as the second president of the United States. Now, when the Constitution was first drafted, the way we pick candidates was different. If you came in second place in the electoral college vote, you would be the vice president. So Thomas Jefferson came in second. So he became the vice president. And of course, he didn't work with John Adams. Of course, he bitched, he complained. And that's why we have the 11th Amendment, or I'm sorry, the 12th Amendment. This was created because Thomas Jefferson couldn't be a fucking grown up and an adult and work with John Adams. During the Adams presidency, there was something known as the Quasi-War with France. And during this time, John Adams actually reached out to George Washington to come back as commander-in-chief to lead the forces in case of an actual war with France. And Washington said that the only way he would do it was if Hamilton came with him, because Alexander Hamilton is the fucking man. During the period of the Quasi-War, there would be a political scandal known as the XYZ affair. Basically, there were geopolitical meetings between delegates of the United States and delegates of France. Thomas Jefferson as vice president, and as a former Secretary of State and a former ambassador to France, he decided that he didn't like the Federalist Party. He loved France. And what he did was he gave information to the French delegates that would help them. That should be treason, right? Like if you help a foreign nation that is on a hostile position with you and you help them gain leverage over your own country, that is treason. So we have already established that he is a possible rapist, definitely a pedophile, can't work with other people, is a plagiarist, and now he committed treason by giving information to foreign delegates to give them leverage in deals and geopolitical brokerings against the United States. That's fucking treason. Now, John Adams only served one term. So another thing he did during his presidency was he signed the Alien and Sedition Acts. But what Thomas Jefferson did was he wrote something called the Resolutions of Kentucky and Virginia, which basically established the fact that if a state doesn't want to follow federal guidelines, federal regulations, federal law, they don't have to. And maybe on the surface that sounds great until you look at the aftermath of that. You get things like the nullification crisis, the Civil War. If you look out today, why do we have sanctuary cities? Because Thomas Jefferson established a precedent that they don't have to follow federal regulations, which brings us to the election of 1800, which was where this country went downhill. That was the election of Thomas Jefferson as president. Now, Thomas Jefferson would serve 2 terms. And, politically as president, I guess there are some things he did well. Obviously, he oversaw the Barbary Wars, which was when the United States and allied with Sweden and the Kingdom of Sicily fought against Barbary pirates off the northern coast of Africa. His presidency was also at the same time of the Napoleonic Wars. And because Napoleon needed money, most famously, this led to the Louisiana Purchase. This was actually criticized at the time by the Democratic Party, who saw it as an overreach of federal government and of federal authority. They thought it was a barren wilderness and had no importance, which of course turned out to be the opposite of the case, because that's the great forward thinking of Democrats. His presidency did have one major controversy, though. His vice president, Aaron Burr, would shoot and kill Alexander Hamilton in a duel. So unfortunately, this would be the death of Alexander Hamilton. Now, concurrent with the American Civil War, over in Europe, you have the rise of the Kaiserreich, the German Empire. And this is when Otto von Bismarck took over as Chancellor of Prussia. The major war was the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. the United States was coming out of the Civil War at this period. I believe the Civil War ended in 1865. Might be wrong about that. So I'm not sure what our foreign policy was. It probably wasn't anything major, as we were still reeling from major destruction. But if we did not side with Prussia, we definitely should have. But again, I'm not trying to make this video about European history. How does this affect the United States? Because in 1870, Prussia would defeat France during the Franco-Prussian War and declare the German Empire, the Kaiserreich. In France, in 1871, they had what's known as the French Commune of Paris. This is where the word communism comes from. A bunch of dumbass intellectuals, blocked off the streets of Paris, much like what we saw with the Chaz in 2020. They took control of Paris, and they were going to set up a new society where everybody was equal, liberty, equality, fraternity, right there. And this would have obviously huge fucking detrimental effects, because the communism is such a parasitic form of thought. And we see that wherever it goes, France, Germany, Soviet Union, China, Southeast Asia, South America, wherever it goes, it fails. Because you cannot adapt French thinking. It just doesn't work. Now, there will be a second part to this video. Obviously, the United States didn't end in 1870. It continues. So I plan on a second part of this video surrounding my second least favorite president, that piece of shit Woodrow Wilson. So if you like this video, like it, subscribe, and stay tuned. Keep an eye out for the second part. The great questions of today will not be settled by means of speeches and majority decisions, but by blood and iron.